joining us now. Do we know if he has musical talent? He covers the Cougs for KSL
I could see Mitch being like a weirdly good banjo player.
Oh, I would have picked like the cello or something.
Oh, classical.
Yeah, right. Mitch, do you have any musical skills at all?
I used to be able to play a harmonica.
Oh, that's cool, though.
Yeah.
That's a cool instrument.
Blues Traveler energy.
And you know what? Harder than you would think.
You know, when I was a teenager, I played a little bit of the saxophone, like every fifth grader in elementary school. But yeah, not much musical talent in for me. I like listening, but not composing or creating much music these days.
Mitch, put it in perspective to me. Jake and I argued about this. I'm trying to think of a better win in BYU history than winning on the road at Kansas. And I will take that win alongside any win over Gonzaga in BYU's WCC history. Like, as far as regular season wins go, certainly I think that's as good as it gets for BYU.
Definitely. It's the best win of the Mark Pope era, hands down. And it's definitely top 5 wins all time. You know, it's one of the great wins in BYU sports history just because it validates BYU in the Big 12. The Kansas basketball brand is huge. You could say it's the biggest brand definitely in the Big 12 conference moving forward, both football and men's basketball. It's the biggest. And to get that victory, I mean, that's the type of outcome that might not happen in the next 20 years. You know, like who knows if Kansas and BYU are even in the same league together for the next, 4 or 5 years. But, if they are together for the next 20 years, BYU might not be able to do that ever again. So to go do it first time in Allen Fieldhouse, pretty historic stuff. And, being in the building and seeing the hype videos, and you could just see that would be a place where teams could instantly just fold because you see James Naismith and the Peach Bucket, you see Wilt Chamberlain, you see that history, and to think that BYU went in there and won, pretty historic stuff. And to see Mark Pope's wife jump into the arms of Mark Pope and give him a big hug and kiss. I mean, she's at everything, Leanne. You could just tell that emotion. Like this is big time for BYU and for Pope and for this program. It's definitely up there as one of the all-time, definitely top 5 in BYU basketball history.
This sounds really weird, but you mentioned it. I was glad that Pope had that moment with his wife because leading up to that, he didn't react at all. It was like, you just beat Kansas on the road. And he's like, he was looking like Lavelle Edwards. His face didn't even move. I was like, geez, allow yourself a second. And then he had that nice moment with his wife, which was human. And then the water shower afterwards with the team, which was really, really cool. But Mitch, I guess, what is the ceiling? Ben predicted BYU to win the whole thing, right, Ben?
Win the whole thing as far as getting to the Elite Eight, I think you win, 3 games in the NCAA tournament?
Ben's saying Elite Eight at this moment. Mitch, what say you?
I'm going to say round of 32 because, and look, that's an accomplishment. BYU hasn't been to the round of 32 since Jimmer Fredette. And, BYU wins, BYU's wins in the NCAA tournament are few and far between. When I was getting ready for that BYU-Kansas game, I looked at the history of that series, and, they met BYU and Kansas did in 1993 in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And since that 93 meeting, BYU has been to the round of 32 3 times since that, and Kansas 27 times. It's just BYU doesn't go to that round often. And, and I think that, that's the challenge now is that BYU to continue the momentum and not let that Kansas win be its peak, find a way to get wins in the Big 12 tournament, to find ways to make a run in March Madness because, I've seen far too often BYU go into the NCAA tournament and the team that you think they are just doesn't show up in that setting. And honestly, too, the Kansas matchup in retrospect, it was like the perfect matchup in a way for BYU and the vision that Mark Pope had for BYU coming into the season of being this high-volume three-point shooting team. It worked perfect against Kansas because they never attempt threes. And, BYU outscored Kansas 30 points alone in three-point shooting. There's not many teams that are just going to avoid the three like Kansas did. Kansas doesn't have those 3-point shooters. So, if you get a team that, hits the three like BYU has faced a couple times in the last few weeks, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, you can be had. And so I don't think BYU is suddenly this, Elite Eight team yet. They got to prove it. I mean, Mark Pope hasn't won an NCAA tournament game as a head coach yet. But if they can get to the round of 32, that's a huge accomplishment for BYU basketball, in my opinion. And I think that's nothing to look down on. You just got to find a way to win at least one game in that tournament, and then see if you can, get a little bit further. But just at least one would be my expectation for this group.
This might be a stupid question just because we have no idea what happens every offseason in any college sport anymore, seemingly. But what can BYU do to build off of this for next year? I mean, regardless of what they do in the tournament.
Well, they got to make sure to definitely have, Colin Chandler in the fold. And by all accounts, seems like he's going to be, with BYU. And, his parents have been at BYU basketball games lately. They love Mark Pope. And, Colin Chandler's, a big boost to, BYU's future plans. And I think also they've got to go into the transfer portal and, find guys that fit this style of play. I don't think Mark Pope's going to move away from this style of being a 3-point shooting team. Now, sure, if you can get a, Hunter Dickinson type, they'd love to, pivot and be in that space of getting the best transfer portal players in the country and, kind of adjust its style to a talent like that. But, they want to be this high volume 3-point shooting team and to find players that will fit that and embrace it. I think that, will be the challenge for BYU. And, this team pretty much returns besides Spencer Johnson, and I would expect Jackson Robinson to move on because I think he's going to be an NBA draft pick. There was about 19 NBA scouts in Lawrence, and, they were probably watching Johnny Furphy and KJ Adams, but also Jackson Robinson. So I would expect he's going to go. And then after that, I think everyone comes back, and I think they want to come back. So this could be a really good team next year. And then you add Dawson Baker, who's been injured this year, who could be, the best guard. I thought he was the best guard heading into the season when I saw him in training camp. You add him. He's a former UC Irvine transfer. Marcus Adams, a once Kansas signee. He's been part of the team, hasn't played, but, there's some really good pieces going forward for BYU to where if they all kind of stay together, they could be maybe a preseason top 25 team next year, depending on how they finish this year.
I can't believe that spring practice is already here for the football team, and I know you're all over it. Big story is going to be the quarterback position, and specifically Retzlaff, right?
Definitely, and I came away from that first day seeing about 20 or so minutes of practice, and kind of just what I expected. A little bit of good, but a little bit of bad too. And Retzlaff had a nice strike to Keanu Hill with a sidearm, highlighting his unique arm angles with his background in baseball. That was on display, connecting with Hill, who's now tight end for BYU. But then there was a pass to the flat to L.J. Martin that was low and at his ankles. And Gary Bohannon, same deal. Had a good throw to Darius Laster over the middle, but then he had a kind of intermediate throw that was wobbly and barely got to Reiner Swanson. And you thought maybe that's a sign of the shoulder. He's still trying to work, maybe getting back to full strength, or kind of this rediscovering who he is as a quarterback after the torn labrum surgery that he had back in 2022. So it's to me, this team, anything you see about this group, it's got to be proven in the fall. And, I don't think that anyone's ready to anoint anything with this team. Low expectations are going to be on them, and rightfully so, because they got a tough schedule. And I don't think there's this sudden wave of personnel that has stepped into the program that makes you say, okay, that's good enough to get you back to the postseason. It's got to be, player development. They kind of took a page out of the basketball team's playbook and focused on roster retention and hopes of those guys returning, taking big leaps forward to get them to the postseason. And I think what's challenging too for BYU football right now is that there's just no identity for this team. And that's because they're in a new league, the Big 12. They just haven't found their footing yet. And so there's nothing that you can really hang your hat on in the power conference world that they're in, where you said this works for us. And because everything last year did not work. I mean, there were moments where the defense looked good and there were moments the offense looked good against, Kansas in the early part of the season, but just consistently, it was a lot of struggle. And so they've got to find ways to, develop. And I think that the post-spring transfer portal window could be active for BYU. By no means is this the final product, but, the quarterback position kind of embodied what BYU is right now. And it's just kind of a little bit of good, but, a little bit of bad too. And that was just in a 20-minute window. And so I'm curious to see, kind of how this quarterback battle develops over these 15 practices.
Positive vibes, negative vibes? What are you feeling from spring football so far? I know it's only one day.
I think there's an upbeat motivation. I do get that sense that this group is really motivated to prove doubters wrong, and I think that's tangible. I think there was a real focus in winter conditioning with the strength and conditioning staff to. I think it was an underrated storyline that I don't think many people realize was, they didn't have their strength and conditioning coach last year. They made a change from the guy they had in the winter conditioning last year. The full-time strength coach didn't get in place until Memorial Day last year. So, and that's a key individual to kind of set the tone for the new calendar year for a football team. So last year they didn't have that. Ryan Phillips is their strength and conditioning coach. He's previously been at Purdue, Indiana. He's been around the Big Ten, and he had a full winter conditioning to kind of set what he expects from this team every single day. And so I think that's a big thing. And they added some more support staff to that strength and conditioning group. So some of the players looked a little bit bigger. I don't want to go with the cliche that they're bigger, faster, stronger, flying around. I'm not going to give our listeners that, because they want to see it in the fall. But there were some guys that did look noticeably bigger, and because I think that how they played last year was kind of hurt the BYU brand in a way at times. I felt because they got humiliated in games where they weren't competitive, and that's just not typically BYU. You typically expect a BYU team that's going to be, you might beat them, but they're going to give you a full 60 minutes, and they're going to be a tough out, and that wasn't the case. And Kalani's noted that this group had to get bigger, and they had to add on some additional weight, and you saw that with some of their safeties that they had in the back end of the defense, and some of their defensive linemen. They got this junior college transfer, Danny Saili. Some of the weight's probably a little bit bad right now coming from the JUCO ranks, but he can move at 335, and that might be putting it lightly where he's at. But if he can get the playbook down mentally, he could be a really good one in the interior of the defensive line for BYU. So I just think there's kind of this quiet resolve and kind of urgency that felt like it was on display in day one, and I think that's a good sign for a team that needs to get back to the postseason, get back to some respectability.
Quiet resolve. I think that's the 100% opposite of my personality. That's like 100% like I'm loud and I waffle like crazy.
Yeah, I think that's the approach BYU needs. They need kind of a
loud waffler.
A loud
I agree.
waffle.
They need a loud waffler.
I want to go to a restaurant called the Loud Waffle. Sounds good.
But they haven't had much headlines this past few months, and I think that's maybe a good thing for this group because they just need to they need to improve, and I think it's an important year for Kalani and Aaron Roderick, and they've got to take steps forward, and I think they admit that. I mean, I think they realize that what was happening last year was not a good product, and they got to get a lot better in year two with another tough schedule in the Big 12.
Thank you, Mitch. We appreciate it.
You bet, guys. Take care.
That's our buddy Mitch Harper. Follow all of his great work, KSLSports.com.